empire in general wages wars in remote places and forgets about those wars. But the people who live in those remote places do not forget. And they live with the legacy of those wars that are forgotten in Germany, in France, in the US. Those are forgotten wars. But the people in those regions live with those wars on a daily basis.
Thanks for joining me on this show, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to open this program with the words of Professor Patrice Nganan. And here are the words. Here are the words. I will repeat them. Empires in general wages war in remote places and forget about those wars. But the people who live in those remote places do not forget, and they live with the legacies of those wars that are forgotten in Germany, in France, in the US. Those are forgotten wars. But the people in those regions live with those wars on a daily basis. The only country that the professor left out was Britain, and Britain is very, very important in our story. And so for 100 years, over 100 years, the Germans came in with their war. The British came in, kicked out the Germans, took over Ambazonia. And when it was time for Ambazonia to regain its land and its humanity, the British did not go away. They did not do that. They came up with something called independence by joining. Yes, they came up with something called independence by joining, and so took us and gave us to the French. And so Ambazonia remained suffering the legacies of German war, the British war, and now the French wars. On 1st October, Terence talked about the doctrine of discovery. Started with Pope Nicholas V, who authorized Europeans to go and conquer the world. And that God was, that when they said man was made in God's image, that man is a white male. And so they should go around and conquer the world because they have dominion over the world. And that's why that's what Ambazonians have been suffering from. I'm going to limit this conquer only within Ambazonia because we're talking about Ambazonia today. Ambazonian people have been suffering that till today. Now, in 2015, the lawyers started their agitation. And let's concentrate on what the people of Ambazonia have been doing to restore their humanity. In 2015, they started. 2016, they started bringing in the population. And by 2017, I remember 22nd September 2017, the whole Ambazonian population went on the street and rejected colonization.
Was speaking about life, Mamenda.
And on October 1, the big time killing came. The big time killing that started look, when I say big time killing, I mean war. There was war going on before it was declared on November 30 of that same year, of 2017. Because since the Germans came in, Ambazonians have been dying. They either die from war, or they die from forced labor, or they die from neglect, or they've been dying. But in 2017, Ambazonians, under the leadership of the lawyers, the teachers, civil society, everybody joined in, we all said, this must come to an end, because guess what? Even though Nicholas the Fifth thought, the man, if we want to take the Bible to be the word of God, the man that God created, the first man on earth, was not a white man, okay? Was not a white man. The whites came later. So it's very, very interesting that they now claim that they are the man that God is talking about. Okay? But Ambazonians said, we are going to be the human beings that God created us to be. And since then, La République, the war that they took to pacify French Cameroon, they brought it to Ambazonia. And till today, it's been 6 years. It hasn't pacified the Ambazonians. Instead, the Ambazonians have become very resilient. And in that resiliency, the French and its governors in their colonial territory are now looking for different ways to still conquer the Ambazonian people, to still keep the Ambazonian people in their land under their control. And so what did they do? They've been looking for other ways. The one big one, apart from what they've been doing in the territory, the one big one was the Swiss talks. In those Swiss talks, you can hear somebody laughing on the background. I'll come and introduce you to who is laughing. In the Swiss talks, if you look at who they invited, they did not invite any of the people who actually was fighting for the independence of Ambazonia. They did not. They brought in what I call middlemen in the West, who, again, I'll go back to Teres Banga Wakai, who said most of those people carry foreign passports, which meant that they voted with their feet out of that colonized and traumatized territory into other lands where they have become citizens. They're living well. They're not part of that suffering in a colonial state anymore. That's who were invited to Switzerland. Lawyer Bobga Harmony Bobga Mbuton, who was one of the lead people fighting that struggle, who led the lawyers to challenge the constitutionality of independence by joining. If they did that properly, maybe the French will own us clear, but they did not go through. The lawyer said, show me the Act of Union. They showed the gun. That lawyer was available in the free world, but he was never invited to the Swiss talks. I want to use just that one. And I do have that lawyer on the phone with me now. And the reason I have him on the phone is because there's another, after having wasted about 5 years with the Swiss talks. Let me say something about Switzerland before we move to Canada. Switzerland was a country where Paul Biya spent most of his time as the president of La République du Cameroon than in his own country. Until the citizens of La République du Cameroon in Europe went and drove him out of the Continental Hotel.
L'heure est finie, on traverse, Paul Biya sort. Allez, on traverse. L'heure est finie. Les gaz ont fini. Paul Biya est parti.
The citizens of La République du Cameroon in Europe went and drove him out of the Continental Hotel. The Swiss tried to stop them from driving him, but those boys, those people, those men and women at the Continental Hotel accepted fire hoses, brutality from the Swiss police, and they finally decided that, you know what, Paul Biya should go. That's who we accepted, we Ambazonians accepted that could be a fair judge. It can be a fair moderator. Now, I have heard people describe Canada as Swiss 0.2. And again, in this Canadian situation, they have invited all the diasporans the middlemen in the diaspora, and still have not invited lawyer Bobga, who is next door in the United States. Now I do have lawyer Bobga on the phone, and Barrister, are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
How do you feel? Not in Canada as the others went.
I am pretty much at ease, and let me correct one impression from our viewers. It has never been my interest to take a podium that projects Harmony Bobga into some sort of importance, effervescent or permanent. Rather, I have been interested and dedicated from the age of 11 to working for the integrity of the identity and nationhood of Southern Cameroons, which we have legitimately, after declaring our independence, renamed Ambazonian. And luckily, I keep checking, nobody is claiming that name Ambazonian other than us. So it's come to stay. I always like to caution against this rat race for leadership, position, and what have you. I have a communitarian philosophy of developing the composite identity of Ambazonia that takes into account the relevance and importance of each and every Ambazonian. And maybe I should let you know this. The gentleman who is known to the world today as Vice President of the very first interim government, because the interim government has acquired some cancerous illness that it continuously multiply itself these days. Mr. Yerima was invited to the Swiss talks, and I was pretty happy when he invited me to give him counsel. And that's what I do best. Advise to prevent errors. Here's what happened. The big catch was going to be anybody representing Siseko Ayub Tabe and his team, and this was Yerima. So the guys who went to Switzerland, they completely flouted every step of preparation and transparency amongst themselves and between themselves and the rest of Ambazonians. So what did I do? I told this guy, we have to pull a fast one on these people. Don't say, no, you are not going. But you will go to Switzerland from Holland and you are not going to enter that meeting. And I prepared the memo for him. When he got to Switzerland, he ducked off to Geneva and sent them a memo that he is not coming when 1, 2, 3 issues are not clear. Because the international conspiracy, which the establishment in Cameroon has been peddling, is that we have never been, we are not, and we shall never be a nation. That is to say, they historically attempt to negate our right to an identity as a people, despite the pronouncement of the African Commission. So what we did was, I said, okay, unfortunately, maybe out of excitement or some slight degree of naivety, my person that I was advising, and instead of zipping his mouth, when you advise somebody, you don't go and tell them that I have this guy who is advising me, it's not me who is taking the decision. It was a bit funny, but that's what he did. And I don't blame him too much about it, because he was having exposure to a very complicated power play situation that any neophyte would have difficulty navigating around it. I can excuse him for that, and anybody should excuse him for that. But it also helped in another way. It was a productive error, because at the end of the day, the desk officer in the NGO, I don't know whether it's a Gongo or an NGO, but it's pretty much sponsored by Cameroon government. I mean, by the Swiss government. And most of its directors are former UN workers. So that begins to tell you this thing is not an idle outfit. Then I asked to talk to the desk officer. I had prepared about 30 questions, which I gave the desk officer. I said, answer this and send to me, because I wanted to pin them down to a document. The guy was smart. He went the Cameroon way.
What are some of the, just a second, what are some of the documents you asked for?
Well, I asked very clearly, who has mandated these talks? Is it you, the NGO, inviting two parties that you have identified are in conflict? Or is it the Swiss government? Or is it the Cameroon government that has solicited you to facilitate the talks? I said, after you would have answered that question, I would like you to answer, how do they identify the two parties? The Republic of Cameroon operates on a theory of the conflict is an internal conflict. The Ambazonians operate on a theory that the historical legal foundation of Ambazonia is incontestable. And I stood there to give testimony that I had a pending suit before the Constitutional Council of the Republic of Cameroon, filed on July 12, 2016, requesting the government of the Republic of Cameroon that they should present to us an act of union that legally brought the Republic of Cameroon and Southern Cameroons into one nation in whatever form, whether it is a federation, it is a unitary state, or a confederation. I'd like to see that document. And absent that document, we are talking of two nations, two states. And for a conflict to exist and any third party comes in to facilitate a resolution or a transformation of that conflict, there must primarily be a recognition of the parties to the conflict. Because the nature of the conflict flows from the claims, the conflicting claims of the parties to the conflict. The killings, the noise, and so on are symptoms of the substance of the conflict. And we need to decloud this conflict. Just like we wash diamond to get the fine germ. We want to see that germ. Because once you see the germ, you can start shaping it into what you want in terms of resolution of the conflict or transformation of the conflict. The other question I asked the desk officer was, who is bankrolling these talks? Because there is, of necessity, the movement of participants in the talks from Cameroon, from the United States, from Britain, around the world. Ambazonians who are in the diaspora, maybe those who are still back in Cameroon, then the people of the Republic of Cameroon, by understanding of a conflict between Ambazonians and Cameroonians. So who is paying their flight? Who is paying for their board and room, or room and board in Switzerland for the number of days that they're going to be there? This young man, I would say, got so embarrassed that he confessed to me that those my questions were too hard for him to answer. Not simply that he didn't have the mandate to answer, that he would defer to the overall boss of his organization to answer me. Mm-hmm. So he went back to the boss and they came back with a written memo. You remember when Bia went for some meeting in Paris, and they asked him a question about the Ambazonian. They pulled a paper to read, and they said, no, just answer this question extempore.
Speak here.
Understand me? So I am completely embarrassed because I brought some words to say. I would like to do this.
Yes, Mr. President, you want to make a statement? Please. 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
2 minutes, Mr. President. I know you are a president, but here we are all equal. If you don't mind, I hope you don't mind. This is civil society organization. For a moment to our bosses.
Bon.
Please.
Bon. Monsieur le Président, Madame, do you understand me?
Yes.
Madame la secrétaire générale de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, Monsieur Mohamed.
Because these are mechanized politicians. I mean, when they leave home, they put their minds in a bell jar, and the master speaks to them through them by the memo they hold in their hands. So they came and I rejected the memo. I said, I gave you a number of questions and you're coming to present me a thesis? No. If that is the case, it's a completely different scenario. Let me prepare my own case theory of Ambazonia and you present your own case theory of talks after La République du Cameroon must have presented their own case theory of why Ambazonia is part of La République du Cameroon. Let us not jump critical stages in this discussion. And the matter fizzled out.
So your questions were never answered?
They were never answered. And that is where Yerima went back to Holland and the thing collapsed before they kind of did some patchy work again, and they had a second move to Switzerland. I call it, paid for vacation. But this is a critical thing that came out of that, my interaction with the gentleman. When I asked him who is bankrolling it, he said France had offered to finance the talks, and we did not accept because, you know, there is a perception of France amongst Ambazonians, and so we rejected that. That was kind of upping their neutrality. Then I said, who then did you accept funding from? He said, it was Canada. And I laughed, throwing my legs and my hands in the air. I said, Canada? Does he remember when de Gaulle visited Canada and went to Quebec and said, Vive le Québec?
Vive le Québec libre.
Yes, he meant that he was seeing Quebec as an independent entity from Canada. It was French and non-negotiable. Hey, let me say this. Anything that is, you know, packaged in Canada for the situation in Ambazonia, between Ambazonia and La République du Cameroon, I take it with a pinch of salt.
Explain why, please.
And this is because it is very easy for France to wire the money with instructions to Quebec and say, package this for them. We don't want you to start aching your head where you will get the money. We had wanted to give them, this is the envelope, you send it to them. And I'm saying this because of a personal experience of mine before I fled the country. I had a 2-hour meeting with the then Canadian ambassador, and I gave him all the memos that the lawyers had been sending to the government, plus the petition I had filed before the Supreme Court of Cameroon that was doubling as the Constitutional Council. And he told me, if that is your frustration, we have a project we are working on with the Supreme Court, and it's a lot of money. So I'm going to use that to leverage them to see why they should not hear your petition. Lo and behold, as we speak, the petition is still in the judicial mortuary of the Constitutional Council, because it has not as much as been listed for hearing. And the reason is obvious, because I did not request for monetary compensation. I asked them, after establishing, developing the argument to the point, I asked them, this is the way I worked it out. I said, we are lawyers, we are arguing for common law, but common law cannot survive outside the political continuum that supports it. And the political continuum that supports it is the Anglo-Saxon political culture that we inherited and adapted. I'd like you to take particular note of inherited yet adapted to the specific circumstances of Ambazonian people. As I say, to this date, neither the Supreme Court has informed me, despite 2 reminders, whether or not they are ready to hear that case. And I can tell you, if that petition is heard objectively, it will save us all the bullets we have been wasting. Because the answer is simple. If there is no act of union, Cameroon should be apologizing, and they might even, from a Pan-Africanist perspective, expose the manipulators behind the mask that we were deceived. And we can tell them, brother, we forgive you.
All right, just stop there for a second. Let me clarify a few things. So the Canadians never came through with using the leverage they had to answer any of your questions.
Not at all.
Okay.
From every indication, they were softening those who were ready to stand up against the government by making promises that will never be fulfilled.
What are some of the promises, please?
Like, case will be heard. I wasn't stupid to tell them that they should tell Cameroon government to quit Ambazonia. I said, let their judges decide the case on the facts and the law. Because I was confident they will never have any argument. And I've been interviewed before on this. And I said, in the event where they give a decision that is at variance with the proper sense of justice, that is a true, professional, objective application with integrity of the law on the facts, as gathered from the correct history, not the distorted history of some pseudo-intellectuals. I don't want to waste my breath mentioning their names. The decision, if it comes out and it doesn't favor us, we shall take it to the international fora where Cameroon is a member. And I actually declared that it would be the African Commission, because there I will hold the African Commission's feet to the fire by saying that you had declared us as a people. We have gone to the Constitutional Council of Cameroon and said we are not simplistically a people. By dint of the historical facts and the law, international law, we are not part of the territory in Central African sub-region that had independence on the 1st of January 1960. We are a separate people who were initially attached to the colony of Lagos, then to the eastern region of Nigeria, and eventually decided we had to go back to our own home. Before the British, the French, the Americans got involved to twist around and force down our throat, we were raped into a projected union with La République du Cameroun for the interest of the foreign interest that supports Cameroon from that time till today. And here is the thing. The Republic of Cameroon behaved like an 11-year-old child who received a Rolls Royce for birthday from the father and decided to ride it alone without using a driver. So they crashed from day one. They thought by, drugging the compromised leaders of Ambazonians in Fumban, that would be done deal. And they forgot to get the papers right. And since French law operates generally by templates, it does not give enough room for creative initiative where you can plug the holes as you meet them. Thanks to people like Pambile of blessed memory, his opposition group, they raised hell in Fumban that this matter is not concluded. We cannot just go along. And Ahijo promised. We adjourn to continue. There has never been a Fumban 2. Any other meeting with stuffed pockets with cash was not a meeting representative of Ambazonians.
Okay,
Whatever the case, the holes in the referendum, so-called, of 1972 further deepened the self-destruction of La République du Cameroon.
All right, Barrister, when you start going to 1972, you're going to the
I'm just laying the foundation, because let me tell you.
No, I understand. Let me intervene a little bit, please. I understand what you're saying. I think what I'm saying is that before we go into 1972, let me ask you a few questions. First, let me say that I know I introduced you like the leader who led the lawyers to what has become our revolution, and you're trying to push that off. Let me say this: you the eye that sees, and in there's an African proverb that the eye that sees does not see itself. So just let us see you the way we want to see you, and you can see yourself the way you want to see yourself. But the second thing I want to say, yes, I just declared that. So
yeah, it's very discomforting for me to stand here and be tooting my own horn. But facts are facts.
Yeah, facts are facts. So yes, and I'm not wrong, because you just came and confirmed that what I said was true. But let me ask you this. I know you're saying they should show you the Act of Union. I mean, the British did talk about independence by joining. And we saw that ceremony at the airport in Tico. What are you saying about those? That all of that did not cement, did not give you what you're looking for?
Well, I'm not a native speaker of English language, but I can tell you very proudly, this I don't give excuses for. I was taught English after primary school by British and Irish women who mastered the language as natives and also had the right qualification in higher education to be able to bring me close to a native speaker and native writer of English language. So I understand the words I use, and when I place them somewhere, they have their impact. There's no such thing in constitutional dynamics as joining by a British ambassador who is not an Ambazonian, pulling off a piece of paper. And I even heard, and I say this because I don't have hard evidence of that, but there's strong oral evidence to show that that was handwritten by the then British ambassador, who handed the piece of paper to President Ahidjo at the airport. When the British administrator, at the airport at Tico, when the British administrators and soldiers were leaving Ambazonia, most of the foot soldiers went by sea from Tico Wharf, and then their buses flew from Tico Airport. First of all, it is understood that a country can send its diplomat to represent that country in a number of countries. That happens quite often. So there's no problem about the British ambassador to newly independent Cameroon also representing the British government in the then southern Cameroon, which is Ambazonia today. But he had no business coming to Tico with Ahidjo. because he was coming there especially as the interface of the plebiscite and the two alternatives post-plebiscite negotiations were to take place in Fumban. His business, per the UN directives, was that the British was to accompany the Southern Cameroonian government, because government we had, a constitution we had, drawn by the British. It was called Constitution Order in Council. They were supposed to accompany us to Fumban to negotiate the terms of union. And then he came in the presence of Foncha, who himself, whether innocently or knowingly, as research is now proving, was highly compromised. Because when he handed that paper, which was a symbol of transfer of Southern Cameroon in the most unconstitutional, not even the most basic mode of contract to Ahidjo, Foncha should have raised hell. I am Prime Minister and head of government. Mr. Ambassador, may I know what you are handing to my colleague? Can I have a copy? That statement would have made a difference. But of course, today when we know that Sopo Prizo financed Foncha in his campaign for us to join the Republic of Cameroon and stuff, we know what kind of water might have passed under the bridge. And, you know, sometimes criminals can feign innocence, but let's let that lie. My critical point here is that that was an experience of negotiation. The 1972 that you don't want me to talk about.
No, before you go, Barrister, let me ask you a few questions, though. I wanted you to clarify what happened at the airport. So you're saying that at the airport there was, it seems to me, because
there was no constitutional transfer of the sovereignty of Southern Cameroon that was emerging to independence the next day, 1st of October, at the airport in Tico. Because the accession to independence by joining was predicated on, they were predicated on the talks in Fumban, which were never conclusive.
After the Fumban conference, things went wrong. But Ahidjo, nevertheless, printed the draft more so as almost as it was agreed. But later on, he refused to summon the conference for final discussion and completion. And I reminded him in August for the conference. He didn't say a word. In September too, I reminded him, he didn't say anything and proceeded to use it. And of course, he circulated it. We were reading it. He proceeded it and declared unification of the Federal Republic of Cameroon.
So so long as those talks were not conclusive, on the 30th of September 1961, somebody, whether a stakeholder or not, could not have acted as if Fumban was conclusive.
Okay.
And I always borrow the the statement of late Professor Obenson, Professor of Service, who said, who presented his professorial inaugural lecture in Lagos University some years back, before his demise, on mapping a stable platform on an unstable platform. The absence of conclusion of Fumban between La République du Cameroon and Ambazonia, then called Southern Cameroon, meant that the relationship was still fluid. So you could not come and establish a federation on top of water.
There were quite a number of things that were not completed.
Can you mention some of them?
For example, the subjects to be transferred to the federal government was not done. The organization representing the federal government was not formed. But as soon as that constitution was not completed, he worked steadily to his referendum, or he worked steadily by absorbing most members of the Cameroon NDP, who remained there in name, but were already members of his party.
How did he do that?
Well, he was the big man. He commands the fund, he commands promotion, he commands everything. He used that, to do it.
Okay.
There needs to be a foundation, and that foundation is one and only foundation which should be, or should have been, an act of union.
Okay. So you're saying that there was a process to formalize that independence by joining, and it did not take place?
A process to formalize the independence by joining was projected to be negotiated between the parties who were about to be joined as parties of equal status. And you see, let me tell you, when you have a case in court and your lawyer comes to court and turns 180 degrees and it's against you, because the British were supposed to be our lawyers, so to speak, to protect us, because we're the younger and not yet fully independent people who are emerging into independence, to work out the terms of our relationship, which was going to later on crystallize into the fact that we were independent, La République was independent at different dates, and we're now coming to form a two-state federation of equal status. From our experience so far, two things stand out. There was no conclusive negotiation, no equality of status.
Yes. I think this is an opportunity for us to look at Fumban from a different perspective. I think there is a general knowledge of Fumban as two sovereign people meeting to decide how a federation was going to take form.
Mm-hmm.
I believe our people went into Fumban believing that to be the case. But again, on the other side, we had the French who were very much in control of the state called the Republic of Cameroon, who had something completely different in mind. And that was clearly expressed by one Pierre Mesmer in his biography. I think the title of that biography is Les Blancs s'en vont. But before I go into what Pierre Mesmer said in his biography regarding Fumban, he was made the Governor General of Cameroon in 1956. And he was the person responsible for importing the counter-revolutionary warfare strategies and tactics that from Indochina and Algeria into Cameroon that he used in order to suppress the nationalists in Cameroon.
Yes.
So when you hear of Kale Kale and all of these other tactics, that was the importation of Pierre Mesmer, as Governor General of Cameroon. Now, knowing who Pierre Mesmer was, this is what he had to say about Fumban. He said Fumban was a sham. He said that save for appearances, Fumban was the annexation of the southern Cameroon. He said Fumban was meticulously prepared by French lawyers on Aidjo's behalf.
Biya himself confirmed that their secret agenda was to assimilate us, and they had tried and failed.
Okay, that's a good marker, lawyer. Let me backtrack a little. So why don't you challenge the idea of independence by joining? Because you cannot become independent by joining Nigeria, which was a huge established state, or by joining La République du Cameroun, which was itself still a colony and a huge state. You know what I'm saying? So it sounds like, yes, that process was not concluded, but even the UN 76B was violated, wouldn't you say?
My knowledge of international law has led me to understand that international law does not have the hard substance of municipal law. In most instances, what is called international law, because of the limited possibilities of enforceability, veers more towards international politicking. And now, as we speak, the research that I have done is telling me that the conspiracy to annihilate Ambazonia was not a simple game of France and its former colony Cameroon. No. It was a conspiracy of the whole world, the Western world. France is just the villain. You know that rascal that jumps the fence to go and steal and then come and gives to the big boys? That's a game that is going on. I mean, there are certain things that are a little deep that we don't need to go into, but know this.
I want us to
I am emphasizing that there was not a proper negotiation at any level from the date of Resolution 1608 up to today. And that is where I am saying our trouble has come because we have never been given the opportunity to assert the wholeness of our identity and nationhood. At every stage, they tried to deceive us with a semblance and trick us into the path to the slaughterhouse. And now that our heads are open, we cannot make that mistake, because the focus of our discussion is our understanding of negotiation or all other forms of conflict transformation. And I say a foundational stage is for us to settle who we are, who the other is, and that we must be sufficiently informed. We must have full imperium over the process. We must not just go along whether in desperate, we cannot be desperate anymore because we have walked through fire. Now we look back, we see but the smoke, even if the heat is under our feet. We are about to exit into glory. And it is not time for us to compromise our strategy. We must have a strategy, and the strategy requires that we educate ourselves about the process, about our identity. I don't care which of the groups are going to negotiate, but they should know that the groups are many, like you have many political parties, but Ambazonia is one. And what Ambazonians expect is that their identity be protected, and so protected through every process, and independence is not a negotiable commodity as far as we are concerned.
All right. I just look, since you went back into the weeds, and I know you don't think you went into the weeds enough, but since you went back into the weeds of our process, let me ask you this: even if the paperwork was completed in Fumban properly, and La République or the French engage through their representatives in Yaoundé in assimilating, because you cannot assimilate without destroying what is there. Assume that the process was proper, and the people of Ambazonia have been treated the way they have been treated because they are Ambazonian. Because the French really want everybody. If they had their way, everybody in the world would be speaking French. And so, because Ambazonia was not speaking French, that's why they went on this mission of assimilation. So assume that everything went well, and they still went on this assimilation mission. Should Ambazonia now should they now allow themselves to die in that colonial cage because the politics of the world that you call, some call it geopolitics. Some say geopolitics trump legality. I don't believe that. Because in the final analysis, only justice brings peace, no matter how much geopolitics you play. So my question is, even if all that process was good, should the Ambazonian people now remain in La République, suffering as a group identified and treated that way because they are that group that they are?
Well, the answer is simple. Whether you call it treaty, convention, the fundamental thing is that it's a contract, right? And in contract, there is every possibility of getting out of the contract. You can rescind the contract if you know that a fundamental condition was not fulfilled. If the consent to the agreement was not properly acquired, yet the papers were signed, you can rescind that contract.
Okay. Now let me
finish this. Let me finish this. And talking about the scenario in Ambazonia, which you presented, we have living examples. South Sudan was cut off from Sudan. It's all a manipulation of the West. We know this. And it was not based on the fact that South Sudan was fundamentally different from the rest of Sudan. Number two, in Yugoslavia, none of those places were separated, broken into separate nations with a strong case like that of Ambazonia. Hey, we can't be comparing apples and oranges here. The Ambazonian case is the eyesore of conflict management of the United Nations. In fact, the very fundamental objective of the United Nations is threatened by the case of Ambazonia. It's just that when I say it, I'm sorry, people of other denominations might not quite understand, but as a Christian, I say this: God has his hand in our case. Because if Russia had signed a military cooperation agreement with Ambazonia, I assure you the Third World War might have started out of Ambazonia. But God steered the wind to another direction, and they went and signed an accord with La République du Cameroon, who was already being sponsored by America, Britain, France. So it only exposed La République du Cameroon as an international military prostitute and saved us, Ambazonia, because our case is so ordained that it is only the continuing conspiracy of the people interested in our subsoil that has delayed, but cannot delay anymore. I don't want to go, like you say, we should keep within the track, because if I start discussing not only the US, but the Western foreign policy on energy security in the Gulf of Guinea, then you begin to understand why Ambazonia is so important. Everywhere else is hot. Cameroon was going to provide a hub for reconceptualizing the dominance of the Africans in a more highly sophisticated manner. But thank goodness, it hasn't fallen through. Because the things that are happening in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso is going to cost materially and psychologically so much, both to the Africans and the foreign interferers. But if you just remove that golden pebble called Ambazonia, the whole French influence, which does not serve only France, in sub-Saharan Africa would have collapsed. And the domino effect would have swept through West Africa. French West Africa would have disappeared.
All right. You know, we are going into all of this because we want to give a background to what is happening in Canada. And when I opened this piece, I was saying why you were not invited to Canada. Because until, let me just finish, until people like you are in Canada and addressing some of these issues, Canada is not serious. So, and I really didn't know if you answered the question.
No, I did. Because I told you that it's not necessary for the individual, Harmony Bobga to be in Canada. But my expectation is that any process that claims to represent or to be done for the interests of Ambazonia, whoever is doing it must have a proper mandate. When that mandate is established, the next thing is that they must be properly instructed. I'm not saying some people have the monopoly of the knowledge, but I can assure you, I mean, I have been in this discourse, the Ambazonian predicament discourse, for long enough to be able to tell you, even without statistics, that less than 5% of Ambazonians have their finger on the complexity of the Ambazonian problem. And therefore, they cannot be mandated to depend only on their idea, their understanding, to go resolve it. Honestly speaking, I have seen, let me tell you, I have seen a picture with people that I have appeared in meetings with, who know that the fertilization of my idea and their own will prepare us better, including your own, because you are the repository of information from almost every important actor in this our process, from the Munas and the Fonchas to our days. So what is this business? And here I have to call out this group, CDN. CDN is behind the Canada arrangement. They were not the ones behind Swiss talks. But this one in Canada, they're the ones who have handpicked people and insisted that it should be secret. That is thievery par excellence.
Okay,
and you can discuss the issue of a people and then you make it secret to those people. It is like preparing a meal for Muslims who don't eat pork, but where the broth, the meat, and everything is pork. You're going to serve it to who? It will be rejected. That will be waste of money, waste of time.
I want to go back to something you said, whose results you are now really condemning. You know, you said you don't have to be the one to go there. Anybody can, you know, and then you follow by saying it's a very complex situation that needs experts. And yes, it could be even experts that are not even Ambazonians, because they are international organizations that are even specialized in helping people that are not very resourceful or knowledgeable in making sure their case goes well. And that's why when people like you are not invited...
Correction. I have not said they are not very knowledgeable, but...
I'm saying it. Listen, I'm going to say it, and I will show you some of the people who have been invited. Those people, in fact... those people, I'm trying to see if they even understand why Ambazonians speak English and the whole of France, Afrique speaks French. You know, they are the people there, so you cannot be concerned about this situation resolved properly without making sure that the competent people are the people sitting on the table. I'm saying you are one of the competent people, and if the Canadians did not invite you, or CDN or whoever is working this out did not invite you, then they're not sincere. And I wanted to see how you, as one of those competent people, I really think, look, you've been fighting this thing on the ground, so you cannot now come towards the end and say, this thing that I fought and I'm right now left all my wealth and my family and my friends and I'm in exile in America is not important alone. It's not important for me to continue that fight. No, I don't take you serious on that.
No. Let's understand ourselves here. I am not saying I'm shirking from responsibility. No.
No, I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying...
On the contrary, let me tell you something. Mm-hmm. On the contrary, this is my expectation. I have had leakages from Cameroon where I am described as the conceptual brain of the current phase of the revolution from the National Security Council. Yes. And tactically, it is in the interest of those our opponents to avoid me participating there, because they know that I understand where we are coming from, where we are, and where we should be going to.